Today, we're pulling back the curtain on anxiety in high achievers, what it is, how it shows up, and how to manage it. Welcome to Success Reimagined. I am Dr. Amna Shabbir, your host on this journey to thrive at the intersection of ambition and wellness. In every episode, I'll help you challenge outdated definitions of success, discover practical tools and strategies for growth without compromising your well-being. I am so glad you've joined me. Let's reimagine what's possible together. Dr. Dimitrios Tsatiris, MD, is a practicing board-certified psychiatrist who studies and writes about the interface of mental health and achievement. His popular Psychology Today blog, Anxiety in High Achievers, has been read by more than 850,000 readers. An expert in physician wellness, he has worked with hundreds of physicians and is the author of the book, Physician Burnout: How to Rise Above a Broken Healthcare System as a Practicing Clinician. He has also given a TEDx talk titled, Why Success Won't Make You Happy. He is passionate about empowering people to live a fulfilling life by developing a healthy relationship with achievement. Through his work as a psychiatrist, writer, and speaker, he seeks to fulfill this mission. Welcome to Success Reimagined, Dr. Dimitrios Tsatiris.
Dr. Amna Shabbir, thank you so much for the opportunity to come onto your podcast. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for everything that you do for physician wellness for all us perfectionists out there.
Dimitrios, in your TEDx talk, you said, a 2018 survey from the American Psychiatric Association showed that anxiety is on the rise. 40% of American adults report being more anxious compared to the year prior. But again, are we surprised that anxiety is on the rise when we think about the amount of pressure that we put ourselves under to meet self-imposed and societal expectations? This obsession with personal success is not just hurting us in our youth, it's hurting our communities. Empathy, the ability to understand someone emotionally, is on the decline. Narcissism is on the rise. We have become so self-absorbed that we are failing to see the humanity in one another. We treat one another as adversaries that must be trounced as we march towards our individual goals. Wow, when I heard your TEDx talk, I really had to put down that statement because it's really stayed with me. You are an expert in anxiety and high achievers. These days, we hear people throw the word anxiety around quite a bit. Can you please define what anxiety really is?
No, great question. So anxiety is that feeling of dread that you get in anticipation of something before a job interview, before giving a talk, before you ask somebody else on a date, right? And it really has three components. The first component of anxiety is cognitive. We tend to look into the future and wonder what if, and look at the future from a negative lens, like engage in worst case scenario, catastrophic thinking. Like, what if I get rejected asking this person on a date? What if I sound silly at this job interview? The second component is physical. But once you've had that thought, either conscious or subconscious, what happens is there's a cascade of physical symptoms from head to toe because you've activated your sympathetic nervous system. So you can have tension headaches, chest tightness, shortness of breath, upset stomach. You can feel restless. You can have insomnia. You name it, I've heard it. And then the third component is behavioral. So people in response to anxiety, they'll have a flight, fight, or freeze response. So some people, they flight, they avoid dealing with the anxiety-provoking situation. Some deal with it and, they face it head on. And some actually freeze. They get so overwhelmed with anxiety that they are paralyzed. And what I try to teach people is anxiety is part of the human condition. To have anxiety is to be human, because if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, the job of the brain is not to make you happy. The job of your brain is to help you survive. And it does that by looking into the future and looking for what can go wrong. I mean, think about what the world was like for our ancestors 20,000 years ago. They had to worry about falling victim to a predator. They had to worry about lions and cheetahs and gators, right? Of course, evolution happens slowly, but the environment changes very rapidly. I mean, think about how the environment has changed during our lifetime. When we were younger, we'd have to go to the library, to Wikipedia to look something up, encyclopedia to look something up, whereas today we have access to all this information on our phones. So evolution happens slowly, but environment changes rapidly. So as a result, we have like this archaic brain that finds things to worry about in the here and now. And our worries are valid and legitimate, but also what we need are tools to be able to regulate the amount of anxiety that we face in our day-to-day lives.
That was a really wonderful breakdown and a great way to look at anxiety in different ways. And you're right. We're so overstimulated. The word that was coming to my mind was just overstimulated, overwhelmed. And I know that evolutionarily, my brain has not caught up to that. I really enjoyed reading one of your Psychology Today articles in which you described the 5 habits that predispose high achievers to anxiety. And I would love for us to walk through these habits one by one so that our audience can get a wonderful way to look at this as well as some tangible takeaways. So let's go to habit number 1. You say difficulty saying no. High achievers often have a hard time saying no. Why does this create anxiety and how do you think about overcoming it?
Yeah, saying no sounds so simple, but it's so hard to do because of emotional forces and thought distortions. So, for example, people may feel guilty saying no, or they may have a sense of obligation, or they may feel like they're being selfish for saying no. And these thoughts and these feelings create tremendous distress. So, to avoid that feeling of distress, we avoid saying no. And you can imagine if you never say no, then your life will spiral out of control because you'll have so many requests and tasks that end up on your plate. And as achievers, work always finds us. If you're an achiever, if you're a go-getter, if you're a doer, people know that about you. They can see it from a mile away, and they're going to come find you with work to do. So what I try to teach people is, number one, tolerate that distress, tolerate those feelings of guilt. Don't just reflexively, impulsively say no. Let's press pause and tolerate these feelings, as uncomfortable as they are. And number two, let's challenge them. Let's challenge them. Let's process them so that we're not prisoners to these thoughts and feelings that prevents us from saying no. So as an example, what I try to teach people is that saying no is not selfish. It's essential. It's necessary to be able to serve others at the highest level, right? So through these reframes and by processing our emotions, we're better able to set boundaries and say no, which helps us manage our anxiety levels.
I will say that this one really hit home for me because most of the high achievers that I've worked with, either in a one-on-one or group capacity, this is the core theme that will emerge. And I find it especially pronounced among high achieving women. And they find it like deeply tangled with people pleasing tendencies. I have started to love this concept of finiteness and recognizing that we have finite resources. That includes recognizing where we're saying yes, and like you said, where we're saying no. And often what we end up saying no to is something that is personal, or it could even be our family well-being. What has been like a point of resistance that you might have noticed? You work with a lot of physicians, you work with high achievers. When you share this thought about reframe, what is like a point of resistance that comes up and you're like, how can we work through that?
Yeah, processing feelings of guilt is the big one. So many times anxiety is a secondary emotion and it stems from underlying guilt. And to avoid feeling guilty, you start to feel anxiety because guilty means I've done something bad, something wrong. And that's a very primitive emotion that we're familiar with from a young age, right? And we don't like feeling guilty. We don't like feeling bad because guilt is the difference between what you've done and what you think you should be doing. That gap is called guilt. And there's only two ways to cope with guilt: by recalibrating your expectations to a more realistic level, or by actually doing more and more and more to keep up with unrealistic expectations. So the exercise that I do with people is, well, I'm like, take yourself out of the scenario that you're feeling guilty about and you're hesitant to say no, and put a loved one in it. And what advice would you give a loved one in the same situation? And what would you tell them if they're feeling guilty in that same scenario? And what you tell them is a pretty good barometer of what you need to be doing with your life. Because if you're telling your loved ones it's okay to say no, you don't have to feel guilty about saying no, but then you're feeling guilty, well, there's a double standard there and you're not treating yourself fairly. And why the double standard?
Why the double standard? Love that reflection. With this, we'll move to habit number 2, which is another great one: difficulty asking for help. And it's this highlight a struggle, which is so tough for high achievers to delegate, to lean on others. Why do you think this contributes to our anxiety levels? I know this might be a little bit of a rhetorical question, but often I feel, I am personally going through this, that I am having a harder time delegating to my team.
Mhm. Absolutely. And there are a couple, again, thoughts and feelings associated with this that create this resistance that you mentioned. And, many people look at asking for help as a sign of weakness. Oh, I should be able to handle this, but I can't. Also, the need for control, right? If you're an achiever, you know you can get the job done and you trust yourself more than somebody else getting the job done, right? And also the need for independence and autonomy, right? Because if you ask somebody else to get the job done, then you depend on them on some level. So again, part of the work that I do with people is to help reframe some of these thoughts and feelings. So for example, what I try to help people focus on is being interdependent. We have to rely on other people to reach our fullest potential. When I'm at my clinic, I rely on staff to handle things behind the scenes when I'm with a patient, right? Or I rely on my colleagues to cover for me when I'm on vacation, and vice versa, right? When they're on vacation, I want to cover for my colleagues, my physician colleagues, because I want them to be on vacation with their families, not be dealing with refills, right? And it's that level of interdependence that allows us to reach our fullest potential. So many doctors, like, they work during vacation and they don't take all their vacation. And then we wonder why we're burned out, because we don't ask one another for help, because we've been trained to be self-reliant. But being self-reliant does not help you reach your fullest potential in life.
I think maybe we should reframe and call it toxic self-reliance at this point.
Sure.
I mean, looking back, one of the things, there are two thoughts that I can really want to share with our audiences. Was one, which I just said, this, I can do this better than anybody. This is faster. I should be just doing it all. And then this other thing that we have, and which is performative, very much so, that not only should I do it all, I'm not going to ask for help. I should also look flawless and effortless while I'm doing it all. And I never look flawless and effortless after being on call overnight. That it does not look great on me. And then the second thing is also not asking for help. I'm reminded of a time where I just concealed my postpartum depression for a really long time, just because I felt that that's what you do. You just don't ask for help. So thank you for actually bringing this to our attention.
And I want to add, and thank you for sharing your experience as well. And what I want to add is that medicine and society have failed to teach us how to collaborate. Unfortunately, as physicians, we competed against one another during our training in medicine. We compete against one another to get into med school. We compete against one another to get into the residency of our choice. And medicine and society have not taught us how to collaborate and how to work with one another and how to help each other rise. And I think we need more collaboration in medicine, and realizing that we're all interdependent. Every specialty plays a pivotal role, and we can all work better together to take care of our patients and also to take care of one another.
We absolutely were not meant to do anything alone, all by ourselves. And these are real conversations that you really need to enter, whether it's in our professions, whether it is in parenting. The more I have asked for help, life has gotten better, whatever that looks like. So with this, I'm going to walk us to habit number 3. You wrote this other amazing article, which was Stop Comparing Yourself to Others. Social comparisons come with inherent cognitive errors and plenty of suffering. What a great title. Where does social comparison theory come into this picture, and why does it hit high achievers so hard?
Absolutely. So according to social comparison theory, we use others as a measuring stick. We gauge our worth based on how we compare to others. And, medicine, again, has really reinforced this tendency to engage in social comparisons, right? What's your GPA? What's your grade? What's your step score? Same thing with society, right? With the rise of social media, it's impossible not to engage in social comparisons with just you're scrolling with the finger on your phone. And what I try to teach people is that social comparisons come with inherent flaws. One is that you're always looking ahead at who's ahead of you. You're not engaging in horizontal comparisons. You're engaging in vertical comparisons in people who appear to be ahead in one facet of life. So, when I was a broke college student, I compared myself to other broke college students. And then when I was a broke medical student, I compared myself to other broke medical students. And this only continues even when you become an attending and when you have a family. And it's a recipe for suffering and being unhappy. The second thing is that social comparisons are based on appearances. You're comparing your real messy life that you know very intimately to the projection of somebody's life as it appears in society and on social media. And the third thing is that there's a very myopic view when you're engaging in social comparisons. You're comparing only one facet of your life in which you are behind, and you're forgetting about other facets where you may be ahead. I'm thinking about somebody that I worked with years ago. He had a humble life. He was a blue collar gentleman that I worked with, and he had 3 kids, and he felt behind that he was raising his family in an apartment, and he felt inferior to other people who were raising their families in homes with backyards. And I validated his feelings, but also reminded him, you have kids that are healthy, you have a loving spouse, and you have a beautiful family, and everyone's doing well, really well. And in your apartment, there's a lot of love. And maybe some of these other houses that you see, they might have more land, they might be fancier, but you don't know what's happening behind those walls. They can be fighting and disconnected and detached and going through a divorce and going through health problems. So again, when we're engaging in social comparisons, we're only focusing on that part of our lives that we feel behind, and then that leads to more pain and suffering.
Powerfully said. I have to agree with that. And there is this thing I started saying to my own children, which is when they were fighting with each other right now as we record, they're 9 and 6.5. A lot of time, why does she get to do this? Why don't I get to do this? And so I said, what's the fastest way to get miserable? Compare yourself with somebody else. So, and that tends to be true for all of us. Comparison truly is the thief of joy. And I feel that a lot of us are starting our day with social comparison. When you pick up your phone and you start the scroll, like you've mentioned, that's it. Our brain is hacked right there.
I agree. You have to be very mindful, very intentional if you're going to pick up your phone. Press pause and ask yourself why you're picking up your phone. Because I'm telling you, I had this experience years ago in Florida where I went for a morning jog, spring break. We wanted to leave Cleveland where it's like, the winters get pretty hard. And I'm on the beach going for a jog. And I made the mistake of wanting to check my phone out of habit. And I felt my mood and level of anxiety change in that moment on the beach on spring break. And that's when I realized, wow, these phones that we have, they come with a lot of potential risks to our mental health. And that's why we need to be very mindful, very intentional, and set some healthy boundaries with our smartphones and social media.
Absolutely. And on the same note, we are going to transition to habit number 4, which goes really well with what you just said. You describe how high achievers often struggle with not being present in the moment, and you're just rushing to that next goal. Why is presence so difficult, and what practices help bring people back into the moment?
Yeah, though there's a study out there that I recommend people look it up. The Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. It's such a brilliant title. The Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. And they talk about how 47% of our thoughts are not about the present moment. They're either about the future or the past, and how that leads to suffering. Because if this is where you are, like you're at home, let's say folding laundry, but you wish you were in the Bahamas on the beach, that gap between reality and where you wish you were, that's a recipe for suffering. Instead of being present in the moment and enjoying, trying to find some joy out of the task, out of like the warmth of the laundry and the sight of like the clothes being neatly organized, right? So anxiety goes hand in hand with looking into the future. And as achievers, we're very goal directed. We tend to look too much into the future. We tend to just set goals and think about how to achieve our goals instead of appreciating what we have in the here and now. So one of the things I try to teach people is let's appreciate the moment. Let's appreciate whatever blessings we have in our lives. And there's a number of different ways to cultivate mindfulness. I would say one is slowing down to savor a meal, slowing down to like savor the presence with our loved ones, slowing down to, savor self-care, a shower, grooming, hygiene, all that stuff, just slowing down to appreciate that instead of rushing through the task. Another one is practicing mindfulness. Every morning what I do before I leave the house for 1 minute, I practice gratitude and I try to feel grateful for a blessing in my life. It might be my son, my daughter, being happily married to my beautiful wife, whatever it is, just being healthy enough to go work, right? 1 minute a day. And I know it sounds so cheesy and so cliche, but the more you do something, the better you get at it. That's how it is with physical health, right? The first time you try to go for a jog or try to lift weights, it's really hard. The 100th time, it's pretty second nature. The same thing holds true for mental health exercises. The more you do something, the more it becomes ingrained and second nature. And again, the third thing, as far as being more mindful, set boundaries with your smartphones because they take us away from the present moment and they take us away from loved ones.
So true. Absolutely. And I also want to reflect on this concept of hedonic adaptation when we talk about not being present and we're talking about high achievers. And I'll share a little bit about myself. So I'm very fortunate, got all the shiny objects, right? So recently, after I gave my TEDx talk, the next day the sun rose the same, the kids had the same problems, and while it was wonderful, and this was such a deeply impactful experience for me because I talk about things I've never talked about before. I just felt like, okay, what's next? What's the next goal? And I had to catch myself, and I'm being completely honest because even despite doing this work, it is so sneaky that, okay, well, I have to work on my book proposal. That's what's next. And at XYZ, like the checklist just comes in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you want to like slow down and appreciate the journey, right? Sometimes as achievers, we get very outcome driven and we need to like slow down and appreciate the journey. You know, what I tell people is that if you're so focused on the journey on the goals that you're ignoring the journey, it's like the equivalent of going for a hike and just focusing so much on finishing the 2 mile, 3 mile hike that you're not appreciating the sights and smells along the way. And also, you don't want to sacrifice loved ones at the altar of achievement, as you kind of work towards your goals. Because I've thought about this with my personal life. If I achieve whatever goals I have to achieve professionally, but I'm not present with my son or my daughter or my wife or my parents, I've missed the boat. I have missed the boat in life. And I hear those stories all the time. And those stories are powerful reminders for me. One of the blessings of being a psychiatrist, being a therapist, being a coach is that people share with me intimate details of their lives, and I see how their life plays out. And I get to be the student of their lives, and I get to learn from them, right? So I think what we need to do is maybe take a step back and have a broader definition of achievement, one that includes self-care, one that includes our health, one that includes our relationships with loved ones, and not one that's only limited, myopically speaking, to personal, professional goals. Because I think the shine from professional, personal goals, yeah, that wears off pretty fast. But the relationships with loved ones, the love, that lasts a lifetime. The memories with my son, the memories with my daughter, the memories with my wife, just watching him at soccer practice, that stuff. I'm at the stage in my life where I get more satisfaction from that simple stuff than from whatever else I've accomplished professionally. And again, I want people to have a healthy relationship with achievement. I'm not saying stop achieving, don't go for it. If you want to write a book, go for it. If you want to give a TEDx talk, go for it. I recommend it, go for it. But do it mindfully, do it intentionally, and do it along with your loved ones.
Along with our loved ones. And I'll echo that. And I'll also say that the things that we miss doing with our loved ones and the times that we sacrifice them on the altar of achievement are the things that the biggest regrets are formed from. So before we move into the next habit, which also builds on what you just said, I do want us, for the audience anybody who doesn't know what hedonic adaptation is, if you could define it for us.
Absolutely. So once we achieve a goal, we get a dopamine hit. It feels good, right? Success is seductive. It feels really good, right? So there's a dopamine hit. And what happens is that dopamine hit, that satisfaction doesn't last long. It might last 2 days, 3 days, a week, but then it wears off. And then you're like, oh, I need to go back on this treadmill to go achieve more, right? So then success is a moving target because once you've achieved the goal, it's only a matter of time before you're craving more of that dopamine hit and more success. So you can see how people become addicted to success and they're always trying to achieve more and more and more. And they're neglecting other parts of their life. So that's the hedonic adaptation where people need more and more to success to get that pleasure, that satisfaction of the life.
I know many of us in the audience can completely relate with that. Thank you for explaining. So moving to habit number 5, that's the 5th habit of the 5 habits that you've shared in this article. You talk about equating our self-worth with achievement. And why is this such a common trap for high achievers? I know I've been in that trap for very long. And what's a healthier way to think about our worth?
Yeah, society idealizes people who have fame, who have fortune, who have power, right? It elevates them, the society. And, as human beings, we look around society for a blueprint on how we should think and act and feel, right? And behave. And what I try to teach people is that, if you make your self-worth dependent on success and failure, you're not going to be a very happy person for long. And I thought about this when I became a doctor about a decade ago and attending, and I was thinking about this. I come from humble beginnings. My dad's a cook. My mom's a cashier at a grocery store, and money was tight growing up. And, I'm blessed to be a physician, and I have a different lifestyle than my parents. And I asked myself the question, am I a more worthy human being compared to my parents? Do I have more self-worth? And the answer is absolutely not. I am not more worthy than my dad or my mom, because your self-worth is not dependent on what you achieve with your life. Your self-worth is an inherent, essential, undeniable part of who you are as a human being. You are worthy because you are human, not because of what you achieve. And to be able to detach your worth from your performance, your worth from your achievement, your worth from your success, from your worth from what you do is essential. Is essential for one's mental health. And listen, if you want to achieve because you want to challenge yourself, because you want to grow, have that. If you want to achieve because you want to help people, have that, it absolutely. But if you make the mistake of achieving in order to derive your self-worth, you're climbing up the wrong tree.
Thank you for sharing your personal example. That was such a beautiful way for us to actually look at achievement. I want to read something that Brene Brown has said as I think about this. Don't walk through the world looking for evidence that you don't belong, because you will always find it. Don't walk through the world looking for evidence that you're not enough, because you'll always find it. Our worth and our belonging are not negotiated with other people. We carry those inside of our hearts.
Said so well. Amazing. Yeah.
So you know that I'm not going to stop this conversation without bringing perfectionism and anxiety in the mix. When we think about high achievers, perfectionism always shows up. From your perspective, what role does perfectionism play in driving anxiety for high achievers? Is this a chicken and egg situation? What's going on here?
Yeah. So perfectionism is society's favorite flaw. Perfectionism is on the rise, right? And part of the reason is because it has a positive connotation to it, right? When we're saying that, hey, I'm a perfectionist, what we're saying is, oh, I'm conscientious, I'm hardworking, I'm reliable, I'm a go-getter, I don't like failure, I don't like to make mistakes. So it has this connotation, this meaning assigned to it. But what I try to teach people is that if we look at the studies, if we look behind the facade, we realize that perfectionism is a recipe for suffering. It is transdiagnostic. It is associated with a host of mental health conditions: depression, anxiety, eating disorders, suicidal ideation. I can go on and on. It's also not good for your physical health, and it is not good for your relationships at all. Because if you're a perfectionist, you tend to be rougher on your loved ones. You tend to have more expectations of your loved ones. There's different types of perfectionism, one of which is known as other-oriented perfectionism, in which you project unrealistic expectations on loved ones. And what you're doing is you're teaching them how to be perfectionists, which is a recipe for suffering. I'm thinking about a case that I see where I work with this person and they experience tremendous anxiety every time they host family, extended family for the
Are you
holidays.
talking about me?
I'm just talking about somebody that I see here in Cleveland, in Northeast Ohio, but I think many people will identify with the case. And, what what we realized together working is that the perfectionism is interfering with her ability to enjoy her family during the holidays. The chandelier has to be clean. There can't be any, any dust anywhere. The food has to be perfect. The house has to be perfect. We all have to look perfect. And we've discovered during our work together that it came from her mother, because her mother was a perfectionist and her mother had these high, lofty standards. So when you're a perfectionist, you're teaching your loved ones how to be perfectionists, and you're setting them up for a recipe of suffering. So I think having that information is powerful, because It's a motivator to make changes, not just for ourselves, but for the people we love the most.
I really think you were talking about me. And I know I'm in North Carolina. Thank you for sharing that example because that's so true. There is tremendous suffering, and I do suffer also from hosting anxiety. This one time after throwing a party, I actually shared about this on Instagram, and I felt like I needed to talk about it because I know that I'm not the only one. There are all these reels that are circulating. I think a lot of individuals from brown backgrounds, South Asian backgrounds might see it like what my mom thinks happens when I host people. Or the door opens and these humans are going straight to your wardrobe. They're actually going to see everything. It's this impression management, which is a great concept I learned from
Mm.
Sahaj Kohli. So thank you for sharing that.
And thank you for sharing your experience. And many times families project tremendous pressure and expectations on us, and they come at a cost.
They really do. So, shifting gears again, this podcast is about redefining success. I've heard you share so many wonderful examples, but if you were to step back and just reflect on life at large, how have you reimagined success for yourself?
Yeah, for me, I want to have a broad definition of success, one that includes my relationship with my loved ones, my son, my daughter, my wife, my parents, my loved ones, my close friends. Because if I'm so fixated on personal and professional goals that I am sacrificing my loved ones, then I've missed the boat. So again, I enjoy pursuing personal goals and I encourage people to pursue them, but do them with your loved ones in mind. So as a personal example, when I wrote the book and it got published in March, my kids were cheering me on, and they knew that daddy would go to the library for 2 hours and go work. And, maybe I would go write when my daughter had her math class, and included them in the journey. And we would talk about it. And because again, if I'm neglecting and ignoring the people that I brought to this world and the people that I have responsibility to, I have not succeeded in life. So I see that I hear those stories every day where people they become so fixated on their personal goals, their business, their degree, building the practice, writing a book, whatever the goal is, that they're not as present with loved ones. And I encourage people, and this is something that we all have to work on, to have a broad definition of success that includes our health and that includes our relationship with loved ones.
Thank you for this extremely insightful conversation. I know that a lot of us will have learned a lot during this process. Where's the best place for the listeners to connect with you and learn more about your incredible work, read all these articles, find your book, and just connect with you?
So they can look up my website, Dimitrios, Dimitrios, Tsatiris, Tsatiris, DimitriosTsatiris.com. So I have a website with a link to different articles from different sources where I write. And then also they can find me on Instagram and Twitter X at Dr. again, Dimitrios, Dimitrios.
Wonderful. And we'll link to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Dr. Tsatiris, for your time today.
Again, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for all that you do for physician wellness and for achievers out there. Thank you.
You might believe you don't have the time or energy to focus on yourself, but this is exactly the right time to get serious about your well-being. You don't have to do it all alone. I'm here to help. If you enjoyed this video and are ready to take the next step, head over to dramnashabir.com where you'll find free resources you can access right away. The website link is below. Let's get started on your path to thriving.